Welcome back to New Rockstars. I'm Erik Voss, and this is a breakdown of Alien Earth Episode 3, Metamorphosis. Noah Hawley's FX and Hulu series goes down some even darker paths as a cautionary tale to never let a doctor take my lung out. Also, never go anywhere without a dislodged blade of a paper slicer. Let's break down this episode shot by shot for all the great attention to detail and deeper meaning that you might have missed. By the way, our collection of Weyland-Yutani shirts are some of my favorite designs we've ever had on our merch store, nerdriot.shop. All of these make great gift options, and they're a great way to support us here at New Rockstars. By the way, I am loving how this series is doing previously on segments by assembling the letters of Alien Earth line by line, like in the 1979 film title, overshots of the Xenomorph lying dormant while intercutting to some of the big moments from the week before, while Crean's strange brew always comes in. It's kind of like the Xenomorph is reflecting on what has happened before. The opening shot of this episode shows a passageway as Wendy/Marcy sprints down to find her brother. The shape of this passageway and the red glow behind it makes it look like the shape of a heart. Even though Wendy's body is synthetic, her heart still beats metaphorically for her brother, and when it comes to Joe, it'll be a different red organ from his chest cavity that will become the focus of the final moments. Kirsh continues to download the info about the specimens, with this screen showing the T. ocellus listing that we read to you last week. Curly seems to be draining the leech ticks, and I may be wrong, but it looks like its inflated blood sac becomes a detachable organ, and we see later in the episode that the leech tick can kind of pop off and crawl away from, kind of like a hermit crab shell, or really like a placental sac, because the placenta is technically a temporary organ that serves a specific purpose, and then it's meant to be expelled. Like, maybe you should call up your mom and thank you for delivering two things when you were born, because they have to push that out too. Next, we get another close-up of the data screen and a confirmation of the name of the carnivorous plant, D. plumbicare. The screen reads the following: a carnivorous plant not dissimilar to Terran genus Drosera. The science officer is given tentative taxonomic classification of D. plumbicare due to the use of mucilage to lure unsuspecting prey, a stamen to sense prey, and a pattern of leaves which form a mouth. Though generally confirmed to be carnivory, D. plumbicare has been seen eating nearby flora in dire situations. Animals given to D. plumbicare have expired in one of three ways: asphyxiation, dissolve, or exhaustion. By the way, this confirms how that one science officer of the Maginot died, because she had purple coloring around her lips. It goes on to say, enzymatic breakdown begins upon something. Stamen also acts as a gauge of atmospheric pressure and temperature. When conditions become inhospitable or a threat to survival, D. plumbicare closes completely. When attempting to open a closed D. plumbicare, many kilograms of pressure were applied to no avail. Once back on Earth, further testing needed to confirm strength of leaves. And I could be wrong, but the carnivorous plant that attacks Deck in Predator Badlands trailer could be a very large D. plumbicare. I only bring it up because Predator Badlands is going to be full of alien creature sightings and Weyland-Yutani connections. Poor Nibs is starting to lose it ever since that T. ocellus tried to latch onto her face, and we see she also hasn't gotten over seeing her human body expiring. Later this episode, she flashes back to the moment she asked Wendy when they could go home, in the same childish memory superposition that Wendy recalled Sid the Sloth with. Nibs asks the real questions: why they couldn't keep their names, and why they were forced to have lost boy names that they couldn't choose, but Wendy could choose hers. Curly points out that in Jay and Barry's text, the other lost boys called Curly Pickles since he was always getting into trouble. In the Disney version, Curly played the pudgy one with the bear costume. Toodles chimes in to say that in the source material, Toodles always missed the action because he stepped off around a corner. Indeed, Toodles was always the shyest and most humble, wearing the skunk costume in the Disney version, and indeed, whenever he goes off to do a chore or anything, that's when the big battles happen. So that kind of informs perhaps why Toodles refused to look away from the D. plumbicare in episode 2, because he wants to look the danger right in the face. Boy Kavalier, who with this team has been watching all the feeds from the eyes of Kirsh and the other lost boys, calls Kirsh to say it's no longer a rescue mission. Their top priority is to bring back the specimens. Boy reminds the other two that they have high quarantine lab sublevels, and I assume that's where the specimens go later this episode, but it also leads us to ask again, what is behind the parts of the Prodigy HQ that this tech is spraying all the time? The crew of this series loves to use split focus.
So Wendy's just out there? With all these things?
I love it here because it keeps Nib's haunted expression in the foreground and Kirsh with all the other slithering specimens in the containers just has them focused in the background. Wendy runs to the loading level of the building and immediately hears the same Xenomorph chirping that she heard when they first landed at the crash site in episode 2. Why does Wendy hear this chirping? Why did it cause her to react in such a big way at the end of this episode? Whatever the answer is to this question is going to be the big why of this series. Like why Noah Hawley is focusing so much on AI in a world that's really so much about like the wet, sloppy monsters and the messy things they do to our bodies. My very dumb theory for now is that Wendy's AI is so advanced due to the Lucy level of interconnectivity that she's tapped into that it is her destiny to become the source code of the future synths that are much kinder to mortal species, like Bishop from Aliens, Andy from Romulus, and Thea from Predator Badlands. I'll have another theory at the end of this breakdown. Wendy finds Joe stuck to the back of a meat truck in a similar greenish ectoplasm goo that Xenomorphs have used to stick their victims against walls and keep them alive for a time that we've seen in the first 2 films of the series. Though I'm not sure if the Xenomorph actually set this up as a trap or if the Xenomorph planned to drag an egg in front of Joe for a facehugger to latch onto. Because I don't think the Xenomorph would care that much about luring in a synth body like Wendy, and it doesn't exactly gotcha them when it realizes they're both in the truck. Also, it goes without saying, Joe's among a bunch of hanging pig carcasses here, recalling Kirsh's monologue in episode 1 of all living beings being food. The Xenomorph jumps on the roof of the truck, kind of like the Xenomorph warriors and aliens coming at them from above in the ceiling. Wendy takes her blade and stabs it up through the ceiling, hitting the Xenomorph, causing it to bleed its acidic blood. The visual of the acid eating the metal looks kind of like how the acid looked in the 1979 film, an effect that they were able to achieve by pouring on styrofoam a mixture of chloroform, acetone, a cyclohexathylamine, and acetic acid. The Xenomorph rolls the entire truck, and Wendy and Joe get separated. Joe creeps out with one of the meat hooks, but the Xenomorph is waiting for him, stabs him through the chest cavity, and tosses him, pouncing on him, extending its inner jaw. But then Wendy hooks that freaking jaw with the meat hook, which is pretty smart because that jaw extends so far, the Xenomorph is unable to match her strength to retract it, keeping it at a distance so that it's unable to reach its tail around to get close enough to Wendy. By the way, we learned this Xenomorph for scenes like this is actually a practical remote controlled by a puppet that they named Steve that releases actual continuous drool. She tries to drag the Xenomorph out the door, but its inner jaw just snaps off completely, and Wendy gets pulled behind the collapsing door. When Joe's able to get it open, we see Wendy has decapitated the Xenomorph. Wow, that must be one sharp paper slicer. But I also think that Wendy is just very, very strong and was able to move fast enough to just get a clean cut before that wound would bleed too much acid around the blade to melt it mid-cut. But Wendy has also incurred some kind of head wound that we don't really see. She just bleeds the white milky blood that all synth bodies have. We just don't know what her injury was exactly. Was it a cut or a stab to the head? We don't really know. But Joe lies beside her so that the Xenomorph, Wendy, and Joe all lie together like some kind of stages of species diagram, or like the dying kids and synth bodies lying side by side, floating off to Neverland, which all 3 will end up doing this episode. Meanwhile, guarding the omelet, as he was told, slightly steps into the sticky husk that was shed from a chestburster, and for a chestburster to be there means that there must have been some other egg, right? Is this the same chestburster that the Xenomorph that's stalking them all came from? The shot of his shoe coming up with the sticky goo, and later the shot of him dropping the husk and that specific slop sound that it makes is exactly Ridley Scott's framing when Brett found a husk and then dropped it in the 1979 film. Slightly reconnects with Smee, and Morrow finds both, and he learns that he's in a prodigy city called New Siam and that these guys have the minds of children, so he can kind of control them by scaring them with the monsters that will hatch out of these eggs. I really like the detail that he plugs into the computer to download the info on the specimens with these special glowing cables, which is interesting compared to the way Kirsh logs in by just plugging in one cable and mostly just like visually scanning what's on the screens. Since Morrow's mission with the USCSS Maginot started 55 years ago, his cyborg implant tech must be half a century older than whatever tech Kirsh was built with. If you've ever tried building and shipping software without a solid workflow, you know how fast things can spiral. Between managing backlogs, aligning across teams and agents, and keeping sprint goals on track, the overhead alone can slow you down. Unless you're using Monday Dev, Monday.com's dev platform. Here at New Rockstars, we've relied on Monday.com for years to manage our content production, but Monday Dev raises the game for development teams. It's a dedicated platform built for engineers, project managers, and cross-functional teams. Monday Dev helps you streamline your dev process with customizable sprint boards, backlogs, and roadmap views. You can leverage AI to manage agents and teams, summarize tasks, auto-generate updates, and even assists with sprint planning with no admin dependencies. Track progress and velocity in real time with built-in analytics and connect every stakeholder from engineering to product to QA with a shared source of truth that scales as you grow. No more chasing updates across Slack threads or digging through your docs to find blockers. Monday Dev gives you visibility, flexibility, and structure all in one place. So if you're tired of old and rigid software management tools and need to spend more time building, visit monday.com/dev to get started. Big thanks to Monday Dev for sponsoring today's video. Morrow gives some clues about what he is.
Are you a robot?
Wouldn't that be nice?
to be all machine instead of what I am, the worst parts of the man.
We've been asking this since last week. Why didn't the Xenomorph attack Morrow if he has human parts? Does Morrow not feel fear the same way or release the same hormones due to like a lack of adrenal glands? What are, according to Morrow, the worst parts of man? A digestive tract and a need to require sustenance, sexual organs and the glands and hormones that come with them that would distract Morrow with like procreative instincts that he doesn't want. He did mention having a daughter, so at some point he obviously did have sexual organs. I would assume probably a digestive tract and lungs because he would now have a real reason to be concerned about the facehugger, but also the fight or flight instincts that comes with the adrenal glands. But whatever it is, I would say he lacks enough of what makes humans in the eyes of hunter species that he shouldn't be complaining too much because that gives him a benefit. But I guess we'll find out more about him later. Morrow asks if they could follow an order to harm people or allow them to be harmed regardless of whether they're bad people, obviously hinting at the 3 laws of robotics from Isaac Asimov, which were explored in I, Robot, which center around robots and AI really being governed by never harming humans. So this is really an aspiring synth trying to connect with beings he assumes are full synths, but he can't yet conceive of this new class of beings called hybrids that would have the actual human minds of children. Now, how do they have those minds? We didn't really get into the mechanics of last week, but new Rockstars science nerd Berg shared some interesting research about the default mode network, or anatomically speaking, the medial frontoparietal network, referring to the areas of the human brain where it is believed our internal narrative and sense of self are located. So to make a consciousness transfer from dying kid bodies, Prodigy would have to either extract that actual physical brain matter or somehow use sci-fi to print a synthetic recreation and redirect the electric current of the synapses from one to the other. If the idea is that these synth bodies could live forever, I don't think there's any actual organic brain matter in their heads that would decay over time. I also think it needs to be kids who undergo this process because their minds and memories are less complex in those parts of the brain. But Prodigy would have to find kids whose parents would approve of their lives being given over to this experiment, thus why terminally ill kids are chosen. After Morrow unplugs, we learn that he erased the data from the source, so for now it would really just be Morrow and Kirsh who have hard copies of this exact data. Maybe Prodigy will download a lot of this data from Kirsh as well, but we are getting a sense of how this stuff that happens on this series will be contained to really just the players on the field and certain parts of the Warren corporations who have an interest in containing it. Morrow extracts a cyborg fingernail chip. I love this detail because it recalls like the computing terms of a thumbnail or a thumb drive. Morrow asks slightly,
When is a machine not a machine?
This question comes up later in the debrief, and while Morrow is asking it literally, this question arguably is a spoken theme of the series. It's really a variation of the Turing test or the Voight-Kampff test of Blade Runner, as well as the whole ship of Theseus debate. We see a close-up of Slightly's neck as the fingernail chip absorbs into his neck skin. This is how Morrow will speak in his mind later. As Kirsh approaches, he knows Morrow is the Maginot security officer and the one of this group vulnerable to the eggs surrounding them. We see a facehugger stirring in the egg, the same special effect visual that we saw as Kane and the others approach the eggs in the 79 film. The Prodigy recovery team gurneys Wendy and Joe out of there, while a forklift carts the still smoldering Xenomorph remains away on a tray with some kind of acid-resistant base. The yellow arms of the forklift have the same hardware design of the iconic loader from Aliens, tech that will come back in Predator Badlands. Why is Kirsh bringing Joe back with him to Neverland Island instead of letting this Prodigy medic go to a local hospital? Well, Joe and these other Prodigy soldiers have seen too much of these proprietary specimens to just release them back into the city of New Siam. Also, maybe this is when he devises his plan to do to Joe's lung what he's gonna do. Dame Sylvia, Arthur, and Boy argue over the decision to send $1 billion prototype of Wendy into a crash site, and Boy asks if he could talk to her.
No. Kirsh suspended her hardware at this site. Seemed the safest option.
After Kirsh's tension with the boss, I won't be surprised if he thinks he is superior to this human CEO and is working some other angle. I also have a pretty big theory about what real relationship Kirsh and Boy might actually have. Kirsh, Curly, and Toodles look at the TSLS, and it really seems like part of its deception is just having a row of eyes that makes it look like a cute little Pokemon until it, latches onto your face. Boy passes the hybrids.
Well done, you two.
The validation Toodles feels from just this compliment. He's like a C student who finally got his first gold star. Boy notices the still undefined 5th specimen, which looks like a kind of flying creature that emits a green sludge. He marvels over the Xenomorph egg and compares it to an undiscovered country. Considering these corporations divvy up entire hemispheres and entire planets in their business dealings, the idea of a new unexplored patch of real estate must be very intriguing. Kerr pushes Boy out of the room and explains the basic parasitic life cycle of a Xenomorph. He might be the first character in the Alien franchise to deduce the Xenomorph process before all hell breaks loose in their own crew. Slightly draws a nightmare nightmarish doodle of the Xenomorph from his childish point of view. As one of the few business-suited characters, notice how Adam Ein's suit has a specific collar that pops up around the neck region, which is just like the collar design of Burke's business suit in Aliens. Could his last name of Eins be a reference to Albert Einstein, I wonder? I have a lot of questions about this guy. We follow Morrow on the street level of New Siam as the voice of Boy Kavalier booms on LED screens on the buildings overhead. He goes down some stairs and there's a health poster reading "Feeling nauseous" with a drawing of someone mid-sneeze, probably a public health PSA to avoid pathogens in a crowded city like this, but one that takes on different meaning in a world with xenomorph infections. Morrow has code word clearance to get directly through to the Yutani CEO, telling us that Morrow was put on the Maginot personally by Yutani's grandmother, and the mother directives came all the way from the top. I also like the idea that the Yutani division of leadership within Weyland Yutani passes down through the women of the family. Yutani wants Morrow to come in for a debrief, but this cyborg likely knows with the data he has, Yutani would just decommission him shortly after reporting back in. Curly comes in to chat with Boy Kavalier, who looks at a screen reading up on the TSLS and notice that he plays with these white Lego bricks. Nice to see Lego still kicking around in 2120, but the all-white bricks feels like something Boy might just be doing either to keep his fidgeting occupied, or maybe he sees these as pieces of bone and skeleton in the artificial bodies that he's dreaming of printing. In the distant background of the hall, you can see that worker in the hazmat suit spraying the mystery wall. Again, only question so far for this person. Curly asks about the lab in his office, where it's confirmed that he printed all the bodies of the hybrids. That's why there's the 3 faces on the wall. Curly's clearly bothered that Boy considers Wendy his favorite and argues that since Wendy only cares about her brother, she should be his favorite because she has big ideas to improve Prodigy, ideas that she will not share with Boy because she knows he's gonna steal them.
I'm saying I think I could be you one day. More than you, maybe.
Yeah, that conversation with someone smarter than he is may be coming sooner than he thinks. Boy defines what a prodigy is.
What makes them geniuses is the fact that they're children. Because children have access to a world of infinite imagination.
So what we were discussing last week about children not being so biased and scarred by the world makes them more flexible and open-minded to all kinds of possibilities. That really does seem to be at least what Boy Kavalier thinks. Slightly watches another odd pick for a pop culture reference on this series, the 2013 animated film Epic, which, like the Ice Age films, was another blue sky 20th century release that I feel like Noah Hawley's kids were just really into. But this is the scene of the movie where the main character, MK, voiced by Amanda Seyfried, says, "Just follow the slime." And we see the moment where MK kisses as she's sucked up to the surface world and returned to her normal size. Morrow calls via the chip in Slightly's neck, and we see some headlines about Boy Kavalier that Morrow has looked up in his public internet portal that's a real scuffed up screen and what looks like a Prodigy search engine with some real Windows 95 looking UI. The first news blurb reads, "Lessons gone awry. Boy Kavalier crashes electric vehicle while taking driving lessons this past weekend. When asked why he was driving himself and doesn't rely on the artificial intelligence he's proud of, the 15-year-old CEO and founder of multi-billion-dollar corporation Prodigy, ... Next, Triumvirate becomes the 5. Threshold, Weyland Yutani, and Dynamic corporations have made way for 2 more organizations. Lynch Corporation has been on the verge of joining the Triumvirate since its inception and brings in territorial control to South America. This one actually gets expanded to go on. Prodigy Corporation, which he founded as an upstart startup through the entirety of its existence, ceded territory from both North America and Southeast Asia. South America has been clamoring to unify under the Triumvirate after the devastating Guerras Civil left much of the territory under drought and famine. Why Lynch wasn't brought into the Triumvirate sooner is anyone's guess, but sources closer to the Triumvirate suggested that until lately, the liability outweighed the recent discovery of an abundance of natural palladium. So we should pause on this because palladium is a crucial metal in tech used in multi-layer ceramic capacitors, which are essential for energy storage in devices like smartphones and computers. We also get some world details about a revolutionary government in South America that collapsed and gave way to the corporations taking over. And we learned that before the 5, it was called the Triumvirate with Threshold, Dynamic, and Weyland Yutani, and then Lynch and Prodigy joined after the fact to make it the 5. The next news blurb reads, Boy Genius breathes new life into Android. Wunderkind and CEO of the newly minted Prodigy Corporation, Boy Kavalier, showed off his latest exercise in synthetic human beings. Boy Kavalier has indicated that the progress made came as a direct result of throwing himself into his grief after the death of his, and it's cut off. Whoa, we gotta pause here. This is a huge clue that someone close to Boy Kavalier died, and that led to some kind of interesting Android and synth development. maybe the person who died is like a sister, and that's the girl in the picture on the wall. Or maybe Kirsh is actually a secret AI version of Boy Kavalier's father, and that's who died. Or maybe his assistant Adam Ines is related to Boy Kavalier and was recreated as a synth. But I would say, based on how testy Boy seemed to get with Kirsh, I think Kirsh might have been his dad who is reprogrammed. I love this. I hope it's the case. And then another news blurb, Prodigy CEO moves offices to undisclosed location. Being CEO of one of the biggest companies in the world, it would be expected that Boy Kavalier would have offices in any corner office, and this is probably talking about his establishing a base on the Neverland Island. Moore reveals that he used to have a daughter who hated raisins. Since his mission lasted 55 years, we are seeing a time dilation effect similar to Ripley returning to Earth and Aliens and learning her daughter died of cancer. He signs off with slightly by saying, "Don't let the bedbugs bite," an especially cutting thing to say to a kid afraid of the monsters in his house. Nibs definitely starts to lose it, and she passes the mysterious worker who sprays the wall, and I love the cigarette just hanging out of her mouth. Wendy wakes up from her rebooting while her brother still gets operated on. He gets his lung removed, which shows how somewhat advanced medicine in 2120 can operate this way. Kirsh, Toodles, and Curly remove the xenomorph egg out to cut up as we see Wendy starting to hear the chirping again in her head. Kirsh cuts open the egg's outer layer to see the inner membrane of the facehugger stirring around. We intercut between these extractions of the facehugger and the extraction of Joe's lung, clearly as these two things will intersect. As Kirsh pulls apart the layers of the dissected facehugger, we see that the prop designers seem to have used similar practical materials that they used in the 1979 film, which includes raw oysters. Kirsh extracts the embryo that the facehugger would normally inject in the chest organs of the host. Joe recovers in a medical bed that reminds us of the one on the ship in Prometheus. Remember that Elizabeth Shaw used to perform that shocking C-section. Kirsh dumps the embryo in the tank containing the recovering lung, allowing the embryo to squirm inside of Joe's lung. This is kind of like David in Prometheus deliberately infecting Holloway with the black liquid. The chirping of the facehuggers ultimately causes Wendy to collapse on the floor directly on the Prodigy logo, looking like she's holding that teddy bear. So either she's like very, very sensitive and the ultimate empath who can just kind of sense when disturbances to nature are happening. And I do like the idea that something about Wendy's source code in this season could be used to design Bishop and Andy and Thea, but it's also possible that her AI is just so advanced that we could learn that she might be able to tap into some psychic frequencies that are emitted among facehuggers and xenomorphs when they communicate with each other. And she just got overwhelmed by all of this. We will see in future episodes. I am loving this show. Comment down below with your thoughts and theories, and a special thanks to one of our YouTube members, Frederick Price, who supports us at the executive producer level. Follow me at EA Voss and subscribe to all the channels in the New Rockstars network for breakdowns and news coverage of everything you love. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.